My first government job really was, I was the chief for ground support software for the E3 AWACS on the 552nd Air Control Wing, which meant I was responsible for managing a group of software engineers, both Air Force enlisted and civilians, writing software for a weapon system, for an actual, the AWACS. It was an interesting position that because it's part of Air Combat Command, it has a long tradition of being typical military chain of command. So they would put junior officers as section chiefs and sort of leadership positions, even over much more senior civilians, right? Because they felt like this is an organization that, as part of combat command, really ought to have military leadership. So I was often managing very talented and bright civilian software engineers who were older and more experienced than me, certainly, especially with that platform. And so there's a certain confidence that says, look, you got to get the job done. You got to manage these people and get this mission done, and be confident in your ability to sort of make decisions and go in the right direction. But at the same time, listen to those people who may have more experience, but they're not in a leadership role. And there's a rationale and a reason for why that is. And so being able to trust your own decisions and at the same time trust your people was a balance that I felt like that particular job really was very good experience and learning, coming sort of fresh out of college and going into this role where I had a lot of people who worked, like essentially everyone who worked for me was older than I was and had been working in that organization longer and probably knew more. But they often were focused on their little thing and didn't necessarily have the perspective of that being in a leadership position gave you. And so, quickly try and find your feet and move on. And so that was a really great job. That role, one of the things I sort of relished about that was in that particular job early on as a lead for software, and there's a sort of almost a trope, very standard idea of this, the butter bar, right? A second lieutenant or an ensign if you're a Navy officer, who comes in and doesn't know anything. And so I worked really hard when I first got to that unit, trying to understand the technology, understand how the software for the AWACS worked, going around and talking to everyone and trying to glean as much knowledge and understanding as I could. And I discovered that most people who had been working there, often they had their little niche and they were only focused on the thing that they were responsible for, and they did not understand necessarily how the overall picture got put together and how those different parts of the organization, different parts of the technology of the weapons platform actually worked. And so within a couple months, I found that suddenly, I really actually relished this going into meetings and being able to pipe up and say, but that's not how the system really works. This idea is not going to work for these reasons, and lay them out. And having people turn and go, why does this lieutenant actually know something, right? If anything, I was almost sad every time I got promoted. I was happy because that meant I got more money. But by being able to come in and not have these expectations and on what should you know and be able to reset people's expectations by sort of being unexpectedly knowledgeable, because I'd worked hard and because I'd done my homework, was sort of refreshing, right? And that was so working hard and pays off, right? And people will recognize it, but also not just focusing on a narrow lane of expertise and being able to understand the overall context. I would say that's benefited me the most in my career is having this perspective. I would say most people, there's the old adage about being able to see the forest for the trees. A lot of the people that I worked with over my career, I felt they couldn't even see the trees. They were busy focused on the bark. And being able to see the forest wasn't enough, right? You really have to recognize that the forest is on a mountain and the mountain's on a mountain range, right? I mean, you got to have a broad perspective. And instead of figuring out what's the right thing for your little organization, as a government employee, you need to focus on what's the right thing for the government as a whole, for the nation, right? And maybe you're a small cog in a giant machine, but the things that we do have impact on a broader perspective. Two pieces of advice. One, sort of focus on the big picture, right? Figure out what is the long-term objectives that you want to achieve. And the other one, let me reemphasize, focus on the big picture. So I find both when I was a junior officer, when I was early in my career as a government civilian, and even today, there is so many things going on that it's very easy to become unfocused. So I would really encourage anyone and everyone to figure out what are the things that you work on where that you care about the most, and focus on those things. As I look through my to-do list, I found, and I did this recently, it was sort of a little light bulb moment where I looked at my to-do list and I realized there was no focus whatsoever. There was a huge list of good ideas, right? Things I came up with ideas. I gotta go work on this, right? This is an important thing. I've had the insight on how the government could be better, how my little corner of working for the DoD CIO could do things better, and there's a problem here, I wanna go fix it. That list kept getting longer and longer until I wasn't really making progress on any of the things on that list. So being able to go and say, okay, what are the two things, maybe the one thing that I can actually make forward progress on and get rid of all the rest, right? You can't solve every problem. Solve your problems one at a time, right? That's my number one piece of advice to people is make a list of the top 10 things that are really important to you, and then start on the first one. Right? Don't start on the second one. So that's my advice, right? I mean, for what it's worth. To care about what you're doing, right? I mean, and this maybe is sort of overly simplistic, but figure out what you're passionate about and go work on that thing. People sometimes talk about, it's amazing the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. I've also heard that rephrased as it's amazing the good you can do if you don't care who gets the blame, or who takes the blame, perhaps. So being able to focus on the things that actually, not just that, I talked earlier about picking the 10 things that you want to go do and go to start on the first one, but rather make sure that thing is something that you personally care about and you can see the impact of how it's going to turn out. You're going to get much better results in whatever venture you undertake, if you can see and be personally invested in what the outcome is. And push back when if your boss gives you some task that you say, look, this doesn't make any sense, right? I'm not going to do this. I had a boss who did that to me once, where he said, I need you to go do this thing. And I said, that effort will never succeed, right? It's pointless. I would love to go do that, but because you asked me, except that it makes no sense. And we argued about it for a while, and I couldn't personally get behind that work. I have a deep and abiding aversion to doing work that I think is stupid. And we do a lot of that in the government, right? And don't settle for that is I guess my message is, when you got something you want to go work on it, right? If you got something you don't want to go work on, go talk to people and say, look, this does not make sense. Push back. Where the work that we're doing doesn't make sense. It doesn't support the citizen, doesn't support the government, doesn't support your organizational mission. Don't do it. At some level, you got to be able to disagree, salute, and move out. The Marine Corps has a great phrase they use about disagree and commit. Right. This is, at some point you can say, look, I don't agree, and you may not have that option to disagree and not do it, but. So you got to be respectful of your chain of command, but don't just take things sitting down. I've appreciated working for the government, at least in part. There's a certain thread of patriotism that runs into it. Certainly, I got into the government role largely by happenstance, in some sense, in that I had to pay for college somehow. I got a ROTC scholarship, which led to career in the military as I paid back that scholarship. And then I was in the right place at the right time, where I was already working for the Pentagon. I left work as a military officer one Friday and came back as a civilian on Monday, doing a different job but for the same organization. I've found it to be very empowering. There are tremendous protections afforded the government employees. It's very secure employment for the most part. Now, unfortunately, my experience is that a lot of people take government jobs because they're very risk averse, and so they like that secure employment, which I think is a great tragedy. If you were in a job where you had tremendous protections in your employment, right? You were not easy to fire. They're going to find you a new job as they downsize. You would be able to take risks and to be innovative and to go off and do sort of forward-leaning kinds of things. I'm saddened at times that the people in the government are frequently very risk averse, and so they don't take advantage of that opportunity to go out and try something and be allowed to fail, because you're going to keep coming to work and you get a chance to try again. Right? So I would encourage people to join, young people to come work in the government, because A, you can make a difference for your country, and actually it gives you a real sense of meaning to the work that you do. It's not just about raising your shareholder value and making a buck. It's about providing service to yourself, defending your nation, supporting your fellow citizens. And that somewhat is inspiring. It's nice to be able to go home and tell your kids or your wife that, look, I'm doing this not just to put bread on the table, but also to advance a greater good. So there's that half of it, but the other half is, and you can go out and you can take risks, and you can go off and do things that are fairly innovative. And so that's, people don't think of the government as being innovative, but there's the opportunity there to do that. And I think I would really encourage people to take advantage of that.